They made her scrub the floors in her diamonds. They made her serve champagne to the woman sleeping with her husband. For 3 years, Adela Sterling was the punchline of New York's elite, the orphan nobody who trapped a billionaire. But the Sterling family made a fatal mistake. They didn't check who Adela was before she was poor. They didn't know that the tall, scarred bodyguard standing silently in the corner wasn't there to protect them. He was there to take orders from her. And when he finally spoke, the entire dynasty didn't just crumble, it vanished. This is the story of how the quietest woman in the room held the loudest power. The crystal chandelier inside the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Beneath it, the air smelled of expensive lilies, stale ambition, and old money. It was the 50th wedding anniversary of Madeline and Vianne Sterling, the patriarch and matriarch of the Sterling shipping empire. It was supposed to be a celebration of love. For Adela, it was just another Tuesday in hell. Adela, don't just stand there like a decoration. Although, heaven knows you're hardly decorative in that rags-to-riches knockoff. The voice cut through the hum of the jazz band like a serrated knife. Madeline Sterling, draped in a custom emerald Dior gown that struggled to contain her surgically enhanced frame, pointed a manicured finger at her daughter-in-law. Adela adjusted her simple black dress. It wasn't a knockoff. It was a vintage Chanel, understated and elegant. But in the Sterling household, if it didn't scream money, it was garbage. "I was just looking for Robert, Madeline," Adela said, her voice calm. She had learned long ago that fighting back only excited them, like blood in the water for sharks. "Robert is busy entertaining real guests," Madeline snapped, snatching a tray of empty champagne flutes from a passing waiter and shoving it into Adela's hands. "The catering staff is overwhelmed. Since you're eating our food and living under our roof, make yourself useful. Take these to the kitchen and use the service entrance. We don't want you cluttering the main hall when the senator arrives." Adela looked down at the tray. Her knuckles turned white, but her face remained a mask of porcelain indifference. "Of course, Madeline." As she turned, she caught sight of him. Robert. Her husband of 3 years. He was standing near the French doors, laughing. On his arm was Tiffany DuPont, the daughter of a real estate tycoon, a woman who had everything Adela supposedly didn't: pedigree, loud money, and Madeline's approval. Robert saw Adela holding the tray of dirty glasses. For a second, his eyes flickered with shame. He looked like he might step forward, might say, "Mother, stop treating my wife like the help." But then Tiffany whispered something in his ear, giggling and touching his bicep. Robert's spine, made of the same weak material as his morals, slumped. He looked away, pretending he hadn't seen his wife being demoted to a bus boy. Adela walked through the crowded ballroom. She could hear the whispers. "Is that her? The gold digger?" "I heard she was a waitress when Robert found her." "Look at her, carrying a tray. You can take the girl out of the trailer park." She pushed through the heavy oak doors into the service corridor. The noise of the party faded, replaced by the clatter of the kitchen. She set the tray down on a stainless steel counter with a heavy clank. She took a deep breath, counting to 10. She wasn't angry at Madeline. Madeline was a scorpion. Stinging was in her nature. She was angry at herself for the promise she had made. 3 years. She had promised her late grandfather she would live a normal life for 3 years, without the weight of her inheritance, to see if she could find someone who loved her for her, not the net worth attached to her name. Tonight was exactly 3 years to the day. "Rough night, Mrs. Sterling?" Adela turned, standing by the back exit, checking a Glock 19 tucked into a shoulder holster, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Robert's car, but he wore it with the ease of a soldier, not a socialite. "Gabriel," Adela said, her shoulders finally dropping, "I told you to stay in the security detail outside. If Madeline sees you, she'll have a stroke. She thinks she hired standard protection, not—" She gestured to him. "Not the former head of royal protection for the House of Windsor?" Gabriel Halloway smirked. It was a terrifying expression on a man known in intelligence circles as the silencer. "Technically, I am working. I'm securing the perimeter." "You are the perimeter, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," Adela sighed, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water. "Tonight, I'm just the help. For about 3 more hours." Gabriel checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that he had forgotten to take off. A gift from the Sultan of Brunei. "The transfer initiates at midnight, Zurich time, which is 6 p.m. here. You're already cleared." "I haven't signed the papers, Gabriel." "The jet is fueled at Teterboro, Adela," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to that low, serious rumble that usually preceded violence or extraction. "You don't need to do this anymore. Robert failed the test. The family failed the test. Hell, humanity failed the test tonight." Adela looked at the kitchen door. "One last chance. I have to give Robert one last chance to do the right thing. If he stands up for me tonight, maybe I don't sign." Gabriel looked at her with a mix of pity and respect. "You have a merciful heart, Adela. It's going to get you killed one day. But I serve at the pleasure of the crown. Or in this case, the chairman." The kitchen door swung open. Madeline's assistant, a frantic woman named Chloe, burst in. "Adela, there you are! Mrs. Sterling needs you in the library. Now!" "What for?" "The appetizers ran out. She wants you to slice the lemons for the tequila shots. And hurry. Tiffany is making a toast." Gabriel took a step forward, his eyes narrowing, but Adela held up a hand. "It's fine, Gabriel," she whispered. "Lemons. I can do lemons. When life gives you them." She walked out. Gabriel watched her go, then tapped his earpiece. "This is Stone. Asset is moving back into the hostile zone. Move the convoy to the front gate and tell the Bank of Geneva to hold the line. We might be making a withdrawal sooner than expected." The library of the Sterling estate was a dark, mahogany-paneled room filled with books nobody in the family had ever read. A large portrait of Robert's great-grandfather, a robber baron from the 1920s, glared down from the mantel. When Adela entered, she didn't find a station set up for cutting lemons. She found an ambush. Madeline was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, swirling a glass of red wine. Robert was standing by the window, looking pale. Tiffany DuPont was sitting on the edge of the desk, swinging her legs, looking like the cat who had not only eaten the canary, but also foreclosed on the canary's mortgage. "Close the door," Madeline commanded. Adela did. "Chloe said you needed lemons." "I needed you away from the press for 5 minutes," Madeline sneered. "We have a situation, Adela, a delightful one for us, a tragic one for you." She tossed a manila envelope onto the Persian rug at Adela's feet. "Pick it up." Adela didn't move. She stared at Robert. "What is this, Robert?" Robert couldn't meet her eyes. "Adela, please, just look at it." Adela bent down and retrieved the envelope. She opened it. Inside were divorce papers and a check. $50,000, Madeline announced, as if she were bestowing a kingdom. "Generous, considering you brought nothing into this marriage but bad fashion sense and a suitcase full of debt. We know about your mother's hospital bills, Adela. We know you're drowning." Adela felt a cold calm wash over her. They had investigated her cover story. They thought the debt she had fabricated to hide her assets was real. "You're divorcing me on your parents' anniversary?" Adela asked, looking at Robert. "It's not just a divorce," Tiffany chimed in, hopping off the desk. She walked over to Robert and looped her arm through his. "It's an upgrade. Robert and I have been connecting. Deeply. And since the Sterling Company is facing a tiny little liquidity crisis, my father has agreed to inject $200 million into the firm if Robert and I are married." "So you're selling him," Adela said flatly, "like a racehorse." "I'm saving this family." Madeline slammed her glass down. "Something you could never do. You're a leech, Adela, a nobody. Robert needs a power couple dynamic. He needs a wife who can sit at the head table, not one who belongs in the kitchen." Adela looked at Robert. This was it. The moment. "Robert," she said softly, "is this what you want? You swore vows. For better or for worse. For richer or for poorer." Robert looked at Tiffany, then at his mother, and finally at Adela. He saw a woman in a plain black dress, with no family, no connections, and apparently $50,000 to her name. Then he looked at Tiffany, who was wearing a diamond necklace worth more than Adela's life. "I have a responsibility to the family, Adela," Robert muttered. You just don't fit in. You never did. Take the check. It's more than you'd make in 10 years of whatever it is you do." The silence that followed was heavy. Adela nodded slowly. She reached into the envelope, took out the check, and looked at it. 50,000. "Don't get greedy," Madeline hissed. "I'm not," Adela said. She ripped the check in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter to the floor. "You stupid girl!" Madeline stood up. "That was your exit strategy." "I don't need your money, Madeline," Adela said, her voice changing. The softness was gone. The subservience was evaporating like mist. Her posture straightened. She seemed to grow 3 inches taller. "And I don't need your permission to leave." She turned to the door. "Wait!" Tiffany laughed cruelly. "You can't just leave. We have an announcement to make. We're announcing the engagement in 20 minutes in the ballroom. We need you to sign the papers now so it's legal." "I'll sign," Adela said, looking back over her shoulder. Her eyes were cold, hard diamonds. "But not in here. If you want a show, Madeline, let's have a show. Bring the papers to the ballroom. I'll sign them in front of everyone." Madeline's eyes lit up. A public humiliation? It was her favorite Christmas present came early. "Fine," Madeline smirked. "In front of everyone. Let the world see you for what you are. Discarded." Adela walked out of the library. She didn't go to the kitchen. She walked straight to the main hallway, pulled out a burner phone from her pocket, and dialed a single number. "Gabriel?" "Go ahead, Adela." "Execute protocol, Sovereign, and get the car." "With pleasure. And the guest?" "Let him in," Adela said, walking toward the ballroom where the music was swelling. Let them all in. The ballroom was a sea of velvet and diamonds, buzzing with the manufactured joy of the wealthy. The jazz band had stopped, replaced by a tense silence as Madeline Sterling tapped a spoon against her baccarat crystal glass. The sound rang out like a gavel, striking a death sentence. "Friends, family, esteemed senators," Madeline began, her voice dripping with sugary malice. "Thank you for celebrating 50 years of the Sterling legacy. But tonight, we are not just looking back. We are looking forward to a new era, a proper era." She gestured to the center of the room, where a small antique table had been set up. On it lay the divorce papers, stark and white against the dark wood. "My son, Robert, has finally come to his senses," Madeline chuckled, inviting the crowd to laugh with her. A few sycophants did. He is parting ways with the past to secure the future of Sterling Industries. Robert. Robert stepped forward, leading Tiffany by the hand. Tiffany was beaming, waving to the crowd like a pageant queen. She held up her left hand, where a 10-carat yellow diamond, the Sterling family heirloom, already sat on her finger. Adela stood alone at the edge of the circle. She hadn't left. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her face unreadable. "Adela," Robert said, his voice projecting for the room to hear. "Please, sign the papers so we can move on. Don't make a scene." "I wouldn't dream of it, Robert," Adela said. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. She walked toward the table. The crowd parted for her, their eyes filled with pity and morbid curiosity. They expected tears. They expected begging. Adela picked up the cheap plastic pen Madeline had left on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it. It clattered onto the floor. "If I am to sign away 3 years of my life," Adela said, looking at Madeline, "I will do it with my own ink." From the shadows of the arched doorway, Gabriel stepped into the light. The crowd gasped. He was huge, imposing, and clearly not a waiter. He walked directly to Adela, ignoring the security guards who stepped forward but were too intimidated to stop him. He produced a fountain pen from his breast pocket. It was black lacquer, with gold filigree, bearing a crest that a few of the older, wealthier guests in the room recognized immediately. It was the crest of the Blackwood Sovereign Trust. Gabriel uncapped the pen and handed it to Adela with a bow of his head. "Mom." "Thank you, Gabriel," Adela said. "Who is this brute?" Madeline shrieked. "Security! Get him out!" "He is with me," Adela said calmly. She bent over the papers. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a flourish. Adela Blackwood. She didn't sign Sterling. She straightened up and looked at Robert. "You are a free man, Robert. You have your release. And you?" She looked at Tiffany. "You have the ring. I hope it's heavy enough to anchor you when the storm comes." "Storm?" Tiffany laughed, clinging to Robert. "Honey, the only storm here is the rain cloud over your head. You're homeless. You're broke." Adela checked her watch. "It is now 7 p.m. The divorce is finalized. I am no longer a Sterling." "Good riddance!" Madeline yelled. "Now get out of my house!" Adela smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A smile that terrified the senator sitting in the front row. "That's the problem, Madeline," Adela said softly. "You think this is your house." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the mansion, the doors reserved only for heads of state, burst open with a thunderous boom. The wind from outside swept into the hall, extinguishing the candles near the door. The sound of heavy rotors beating the air thumped rhythmically. Not one helicopter, but 3. They were landing on the great lawn, ruining Madeline's prize-winning rose garden. "What is the meaning of this?" Vianne Sterling, Robert's father, finally spoke up, stepping forward from the bar. "I will have you arrested for trespassing." Through the open doors walked a phalanx of men and women in dark grey suits. They moved with the synchronized precision of a predatory school of fish. They carried briefcases, tablets, and files. In the center of the group walked a man who made the room go silent. It was Winston Graves. A murmur ripped through the crowd. Winston Graves was not just a billionaire. He was the CEO of Vanguardia Global, the investment firm that essentially owned Wall Street. He was a man who didn't attend parties. He bought the countries where the parties were held. Madeline's face went pale. Mr. Graves, we weren't expecting you. If we had known..." Winston Graves didn't even look at her. He walked right past Madeline, walked past Robert, who was now trembling, and stopped in front of Adela. The room held its breath. Was he going to have her arrested? Was she a former employee he was there to prosecute? Winston Graves, the man who made prime ministers wait in the lobby, bowed at the waist, a deep, respectful bow. "Madam Chairwoman," Winston said, his voice booming. "Apologies for the delay. Traffic on the FDR was unavoidable." "It's fine, Winston," Adela said, handing the fountain pen back to Gabriel. "Did you bring the file?" "I did." Winston snapped his fingers. An aide instantly placed a thick leather binder in his hands. Madeline stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Chairwoman." "Winston, surely there is a mistake. This is Adela. She was a waitress. She's nobody." Winston turned slowly to face Madeline. His eyes were like cold flint. "Nobody?" Winston repeated. "Mrs. Sterling, you are speaking to Adela Blackwood, the sole heiress to the Blackwood dynasty. She owns the sovereign trust, which means she owns Vanguardia, which means—" He paused, looking around the opulent room with distaste. "She owns me." A gasp went through the room. The Blackwood family was a myth, a legend of old money that had gone underground in the 1990s. They were the silent backers behind tech giants, shipping lanes, and half of Europe's real estate. They were worth trillions, not billions. "That's impossible," Robert stammered, stepping away from Tiffany. "Adela, you lived in a studio apartment. You drove a Honda. We shared coupons." "I wanted to see if you could love me without the money, Robert," Adela said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I wanted to see if you had honor, if you were kind. My grandfather warned me. He said the Sterlings were gold-plated rust, shiny on the outside, decaying underneath. I gave you 3 years to prove him wrong." She took the leather binder from Winston. "You proved him right." But we're married," Robert cried out, a sudden desperation in his eyes as he did the mental math of a divorce settlement with a Blackwood. "Not anymore," Tiffany screeched, suddenly realizing her mistake. "He signed. We announced it." "Correct," Adela said. "Legally, we are strangers. Which brings us to business." Adela opened the binder. "Winston, give me the status of Sterling Shipping." Winston cleared his throat. "Sterling Shipping has been operating at a loss for 5 years. They have floated their lifestyle on loans secured by the family estate and the company assets. The primary creditor was the First Bank of Zurich." "And who acquired the First Bank of Zurich this morning?" Adela asked casually. "You did, Madam Chairwoman, at 9:01 a.m. Adela looked at Madeline. "You see, Madeline, you were right about one thing. I do handle the bills. Specifically, your bills." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. This is absurd." Madeline tried to laugh, but it came out as a choke. "You can't just buy a bank to spite us." "I didn't buy it to spite you," Adela said, walking slowly toward the stage where the band had been. "I bought it because it was a sound investment. The toxic assets, however, those I plan to liquidate." She turned to the crowd. "I am calling the loans," Adela announced. "Sterling Shipping is in default, as of—" She checked her watch. 5 minutes ago. "You can't do that," Vian Sterling shouted, his face turning purple. "We have a grace period. We have 30 days. Read the fine print on the restructuring agreement you signed last year, Vian," Winston Graves interjected smoothly. "Clause 14b. In the event of a change in marital status of the primary heir, Robert Sterling, the creditor reserves the right to demand immediate repayment in full if the liquidity ratio is below 10%. Winston smiled shark-like. Your liquidity is currently negative. Adela looked at the room. I own this house. I own the cars in the driveway. I own the dress on Madeline's back, put on the company credit card, I believe. And I own the ring on Tiffany's finger, which was insured by a subsidiary of my holding company. Tiffany looked down at the ring as if it were burning her skin. She clawed it off and threw it at Robert. I didn't know. Robert, you told me you were rich. I am, Robert pleaded, looking at Adela. Adela, baby, please. It was a mistake. Mother forced me. You know how she is. I love you. I've always loved you. Let's go home. Let's talk about this. He reached out to grab Adela's arm. Crack. Before Robert's fingers could graze the fabric of her dress, Gabriel moved. With a motion too fast to track, he intercepted Robert's wrist and twisted. Robert dropped to his knees with a scream of pain. Do not touch the principal, Gabriel growled. Let him go, Gabriel, Adela said, bored. Gabriel released him, and Robert fell face first onto the polished floor, sobbing at the feet of the woman he had treated like a servant an hour ago. Adela looked down at him. There is no home for us, Robert. And actually, there is no home for you here, either. She turned to Madeline. You humiliated me for 3 years. You made me clean your mud. You mocked my mother. You treated me like a parasite. Adela signaled to the security team that had entered with Winston. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. You may take personal items only, clothing and toiletries. No jewelry, no art, no electronics. Those are assets of the bank. Where will we go? Madeline whispered, her arrogance finally shattered into dust. I hear the Motel 6 on the interstate has vacancies, Adela said, echoing a comment Madeline had made about Adela's family years ago. They leave the light on for you. Adela turned around and began to walk toward the exit. The crowd, the elite of New York, parted like the Red Sea. They looked at her, not with pity, but with terror and awe. They knew that tomorrow, the name Adela Blackwood would be the only name that mattered in the city. Adela! Robert screamed from the floor. You can't leave me like this. I'm your husband. Adela stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. You're my ex-husband, Robert, and you're trespassing. She walked out into the cool night air. Gabriel held the door of the lead limousine open for her. Where to, Madam Chairwoman? Gabriel asked. The airport, Adela said, sliding into the leather seat. But Gabriel, yes. Stop by a burger place on the way. I'm starving. They never did let me eat the appetizers. As the convoy of black SUVs pulled away, leaving the wailing Sterlings behind in their crumbling kingdom, Adela thought it was over. She thought she had won. But as she looked out the window, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She picked it up. Hello? A distorted voice on the other end spoke, cold and mechanical. You think you've cleaned house, Adela, but you didn't check the basement. Your grandfather didn't die of natural causes, and neither will you. The line went dead. Adela stared at the phone. The Victory champagne in the limo suddenly tasted flat. The interior of the armored SUV was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the bulletproof glass. Adela sat frozen, the burner phone still clutched in her hand, the distorted mechanical voice echoing in her mind. You didn't check the basement. Turn the car around, Adela whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but in the hush of the cabin, it sounded like a scream. Gabriel Halloway looked at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes, usually scanning for external threats, locked onto hers. He saw something there that scared him more than any assassin. He saw a woman who had realized her entire history was a lie. Ma'am? Gabriel asked, his tone cautious. We are 10 minutes from the airfield. The jet is spooled up. My team has identified a potential safe house in Zurich. We need to leave the tri-state area. That call was a direct threat." "I said turn around, Gabriel," Adela snapped. She didn't mean to yell, but the panic was clawing at her throat. "The caller. He said my grandfather was murdered. He said the answer is in the basement." Winston Graves, sitting beside her, looked up from his tablet. The glow of the screen illuminated his worried face. "Adela, this has all the hallmarks of a trap, a lure. They know you've taken their assets. Desperate men do desperate things. If we go back there, we are walking into a kill box." "I don't care," Adela said, staring out at the blurred highway lights. Her mind was racing back 3 years. She remembered her grandfather, Arthur Blackwood. He had been a titan of industry, a man who chopped wood on his estate well into his 80s. He was strong as an ox. And then, in the span of 3 months, he had withered. He became confused, frail, unable to walk. The doctors recommended by the Sterling family, she realized with a jolt of nausea, had called it a rare, aggressive form of early-onset dementia. "They introduced him to Dr. Arrington," Adela murmured, the pieces of the puzzle slamming together with violent force. Madeline insisted on it. She said Arrington was the best neurologist on the East Coast, and after Arrington started treating him, Grandpa forgot who I was. "Dr. Arrington died last week," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave. "Single car accident. Brakes failed on the I-95. Adela looked at him. "There are no accidents, Gabriel. You taught me that." Gabriel sighed, a heavy sound. He tapped his earpiece. "All units verify. Packages redirecting. We are returning to the hostile zone. Condition red. Weapons free. If it moves and it isn't the principal, put it down." The driver slammed on the brakes. The heavy SUV fishtailed slightly on the wet asphalt, tires screaming in protest, before swinging around in a tight tactical U-turn. The convoy of black vehicles roared back the way they came, cutting through the night like jagged knives. The Sterling estate looked different in the dark. Adela had ordered the power cut remotely via the bank's control of the utility accounts, so the massive mansion loomed against the stormy sky like a dead, hollowed-out skull. Only the emergency lights flickered weakly near the garage. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the manicured lawns into mud. As the convoy screeched up the driveway, headlights cutting through the deluge, the scene that greeted them was pathetic. Madeline Sterling was struggling with a heavy Louis Vuitton trunk near her convertible. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray, was plastered to her skull. She looked like a drowned rat. When she saw the headlights, she froze, squinting into the glare. Adela stepped out of the car before Gabriel could even open the umbrella. The rain soaked her black dress instantly, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt only a burning, white-hot rage. "You!" Madeline shrieked, her voice cracking. "You came back? What, did you forget to steal the silverware? You've taken everything, you witch! You've ruined us!" Adela walked past her as if she were a ghost. She didn't even blink. Robert was sitting on the wet stone steps of the portico. He was soaking wet, a bottle of 30-year-old scotch dangling from his hand. He looked up at Adela with glassy, bloodshot eyes. "Adela," he slurred. I was just thinking about that time we went to the Cape. Remember? You made lobster rolls. They were good." "Where is Vian?" Adela asked, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Dad's inside," Robert giggled darkly. "He's trying to shred documents by candlelight. It's actually quite funny." Adela pushed past him and shoved open the heavy front doors. The hallway was pitch black, smelling of ozone and expensive perfume. Gabriel clicked on a tactical flashlight mounted to his sidearm, the beam slicing through the darkness. "Vian Sterling!" Adela yelled. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings. There was a crash from the library. Then, the sound of running footsteps. "Secure the exits," Gabriel ordered his team. 2 men peeled off to the back. Gabriel stayed glued to Adela's side. "The basement," Adela commanded. "The caller said the basement." They moved toward the door under the main staircase. It was usually locked, a heavy oak door that Vian had always claimed led to the wine cellar and the boiler room. "Too dangerous for a lady," he used to say. The door was ajar. Adela descended the stone steps. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of mold mixed with the scent of aging oak barrels. At the bottom of the stairs, Vian Sterling was standing in front of a large wine rack, holding a crowbar. He looked like a cornered animal, sweaty, pale, his eyes darting between Adela and the gun in Gabriel's hand. "You can't come down here," Vian stammered, raising the crowbar. "This is private property. Even the bank can't seize personal storage." "Drop it," Gabriel said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The menace in his voice was enough to freeze water. Clang! The crowbar hit the concrete floor. "Move!" Adela said. She walked past the rows of dusty Bordeaux and Burgundy. She scanned the walls. It looked like a normal cellar. Stone walls, cobwebs, shadows. "Where is it?" she whispered to herself. The caller said. Gabriel pulled out a thermal imaging device. He swept it across the back wall, behind a towering rack of vintage sherry. "Heat signature," Gabriel noted. "There's an exhaust fan running behind this wall, and a server stack. This isn't a wall." He handed his flashlight to Winston and stepped up to the massive wine rack. He ran his hands along the frame, looking for a latch. Finding none, he braced his shoulder against the wood and shoved. With a groan of stressing timber, the entire rack swung outward on hidden hydraulic hinges. Vian let out a whimper and sank to his knees, covering his face with his hands. Behind the wine rack was not stone, but a steel security door with a biometric keypad. "Open it, Vian," Adela said, not turning around. I can't," Vian sobbed. "I don't have the code. Only he has the code." "Gabriel," Adela said. Gabriel didn't waste time asking who he was. He pulled a small block of C4 explosive from his tactical vest, molded it onto the lock, and pushed Adela and Winston back behind the concrete pillar of the staircase. "Fire in the hole." Thump! The explosion was contained, but violent. The steel door groaned and swung inward, smoke drifting from the hinges. Adela stepped through the smoke. She expected a safe. She expected stacks of cash or gold bars. She did not expect a hospital. The hidden room was pristine, white and sterile. It was soundproofed. In the center sat a hospital bed, equipped with restraints. Surrounding it were IV drips, heart rate monitors, and a wall of filing cabinets. But it was the far wall that made Adela's knees buckle. It was covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Photos of Adela. Adela at 16, walking out of her high school. Adela at 19, crying at a bus stop. Adela at 22, serving coffee at the diner where she met Robert. "My God," Winston breathed, stepping into the room. "This isn't just surveillance. This is a project." Adela walked to the desk in the corner. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pick up the leather-bound ledger sitting in the center. The cover read, "Project Sovereign, Phase 1. She opened it. Subject, Arthur Blackwood. Objective, induce rapid cognitive decline to force power of attorney transfer. Method, Compound X9, neurodegenerative toxin. Administrator, Dr. Elias Arrington. Beneficiary, the Sterling Family Trust. Adela felt the bile rise in her throat. She flipped the page. Phase 2, the handler. Objective, marriage of convenience to Subject B, Adela Blackwood. Agent, Robert Sterling. Notes. Subject B is emotionally vulnerable. Orchestrate, chance meeting at workplace. Script provided for courtship. It was a script, Adela whispered, tears finally spilling over. The diner, the spilled coffee, the way he accidentally bumped into me, the flowers, the way he knew my favorite book. It wasn't romance, it was a dossier. She looked at the timeline. Date of Arthur Blackwood's death, October 14th. Cause, cardiac arrest induced by overdose. Authorization, Senator Cornelius Sterling. Adela slammed the book shut. Cornelius, it was the senator. Smart girl, a voice boomed from the doorway. Adela spun around. Standing in the blasted opening of the steel door was Senator Cornelius Sterling. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the party, but he looked disheveled, manic. In his hand was a suppressed pistol, leveled directly at Adela's chest. Behind him, two men in tactical gear, private military contractors, stepped over Vianne's weeping form. "Uncle Cornelius." Robert's voice drifted down from the stairs. He stumbled into the cellar, still holding his whiskey bottle. What is going on? Why do you have a gun?" "Shut up, you incompetent fool!" Cornelius spat, not taking his eyes off Adela. "You couldn't even keep her happy for one night. You were supposed to keep her docile, keep her thinking she was lucky to be a Sterling. Instead, you let your mother treat her like a slave and woke up the dragon." "You killed him," Adela said. Her voice was steady now. The tears had stopped. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. "You murdered my grandfather." "I expedited the inevitable," Cornelius sneered, stepping into the white room. Arthur Blackwood was a dinosaur. He was sitting on trillions of dollars of capital, refusing to invest in the future. He refused to back my campaign. He refused to fund the pipeline. He was hoarding power. "So you poisoned him," Adela said, stepping forward. Gabriel tensed, ready to move, but the senator's aim was unwavering. "We needed the Blackwood Trust," Cornelius said, his eyes wild. "And the only way to get it was through you. A scared, lonely, orphan girl. It was the perfect plan. Robert marries you. We wait 3 years for the trust to unlock at 25. And then, well, tragic accidents happen to wealthy heiresses all the time." Adela felt a chill go down her spine. "You were going to kill me too." "Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of the end," Cornelius admitted. "You sign the papers, you leave with your little check, and in a month or two, a robbery gone wrong. A car crash. Simple. But you had to be smart. You had to bring him." He gestured to Gabriel. "I didn't bring him," Adela said. "He found me. Because unlike you, he is loyal to the blood, not the money." "Loyalty doesn't stop bullets," Cornelius laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "And now we have a mess. But I can fix it. I'm a senator. I fix things. We'll frame this as a suicide pact. The distraught divorcee kills her ex-husband's family, and then herself. Tragic. The news cycle will eat it up." He cocked the hammer of the pistol. "Say goodbye, Adela. Give my regards to your grandfather." Adela looked at the gun. Then she looked at Gabriel. They shared a microsecond of communication, a language built on trust. "Gabriel," Adela said softly. "I'm here," he replied. "Protocol 0, Adela said. Cornelius frowned. "Protocol 0? What is that? Some spy novel nonsense?" Gabriel smiled. It was the first time he had smiled all night. It was a terrifying, feral baring of teeth. "No, Senator," Gabriel said. "It means the lights go out." Click. The sound was small, mechanical, and final. Instantly, the white sterility of the secret medical room vanished, swallowed by a darkness so absolute it felt physical. The hum of the ventilation system died. The LEDs on the server stack faded. The Sterling estate, cut from the grid and stripped of its backup generators by Winston's team outside, became a tomb. In that sudden void, panic exploded. "I can't see!" Robert screamed, his voice cracking like a child's. "Mother, where are you?" "Don't move!" Cornelius roared, swinging his weapon blindly in the dark. Poofed, poofed. Two suppressed shots hissed through the air, sparking harmlessly against the concrete wall inches above Adela's head. "I'll kill you all! Turn the lights on!" Adela didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. She dropped to the floor, sliding silently across the cold linoleum toward the heavy oak desk. She needed the ledger. She needed the proof. Above her, the darkness came alive with the sounds of fluid violence. Gabriel Halloway did not need light. He had memorized the position of every person in the room in the split second before the power died. He moved like a phantom, a blur of kinetic energy. There was a sickening crack, the sound of a wrist being snapped, followed by the heavy thud of a tactical baton striking Kevlar. One of the mercenaries let out a gurgling gasp as the air was forced from his lungs, his body hitting the floor with the weight of a sack of cement. "Contact left! Contact left!" the second mercenary shouted, firing a burst of automatic fire at the ceiling in sheer terror. "Wrong," Gabriel's voice whispered from the right. There was a crunch of cartilage, a sharp cry, and then the clatter of a rifle sliding across the floor. Adela's fingers brushed the leather binding of the ledger. She grabbed it, pulling it to her chest. She began to crawl back toward the door, guided by the faint draft of air coming from the wine cellar. Suddenly, a hand clamped around her ankle. "I have her!" Robert shrieked. He was on his belly, flailing in the dark, and by sheer dumb luck, he had found her. "Uncle Cornelius, shoot toward my voice. I have her leg." "Robert, let go," Adela hissed, kicking out with her heel. "No!" Robert sobbed, his grip tightening. "You ruined everything. I was going to be a billionaire. I was going to be someone." "Move, Robert." Cornelius's voice was closer now. The senator was sweeping the gun back and forth. "Hold her still." Adela felt the cold barrel of a gun brush against her shoulder in the dark. Cornelius was right on top of her. "Goodbye, Adela," Cornelius breathed. Adela closed her eyes, clutching the book. Then, the world turned white. A beam of light, intense and blinding, sliced through the doorway of the wine cellar. It was followed by a dozen more, red laser dots dancing frantically through the smoke and dust, painting the chests of the standing men. "Federal agents, drop the weapon. Drop it now." The voice was amplified, booming, leaving no room for negotiation. Cornelius froze, shielding his eyes against the tactical strobes. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. For a second, he hesitated, the gun still pointed at the floor. "Do it," the voice commanded, "or we will open fire." With a clatter that echoed through the silence, the senator's pistol hit the ground. The lights of the room flickered, then buzzed back to life as the FBI re-engaged the main breaker. The scene was a tableau of total defeat. The two mercenaries were unconscious, zip-tied by Gabriel in the dark. Robert was curled in a fetal position, clutching Adela's ankle, his face streaked with tears and snot. Vianne was huddled in the corner, shaking, and Senator Cornelius Sterling stood with his hands in the air, his face the color of ash. Standing in the doorway was a phalanx of FBI agents in body armor. Leading them was a woman with sharp features and a trench coat, Special Agent Miller. Adela kicked Robert's hand away and stood up. She smoothed her wet dress, clutched the ledger, and looked at the senator. "You," Cornelius stammered, his eyes darting between the agents and Adela. "You set me up. This is entrapment." "No, Senator," Agent Miller said, stepping over the body of a mercenary. "This is a sting operation. We've been monitoring the Blackwood accounts for 6 months. We knew someone was trying to access the offshore funds, but we needed a biometric confirmation to prove who it was." Miller pointed to the keypad on the blasted door. "When you tried to override the lock with your thumbprint 5 minutes ago, You sent a distress signal directly to my team. You just signed your own confession." "I have immunity," Cornelius screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "I am a sitting United States Senator. You cannot touch me. This is a political hit job." "Immunity covers legislative acts, Cornelius," Adela said, her voice calm and piercing. "It doesn't cover premeditated murder." She walked forward and handed the ledger to Agent Miller. "Dr. Elias Arrington kept meticulous notes," Adela said, staring the senator in the eyes. "He documented every dose of poison you ordered him to give my grandfather, and he documented the payment you made to silence him." Gabriel stepped out of the shadows. He had a small cut on his cheek, and his knuckles were bruised, but otherwise, he looked as if he had just returned from a walk. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, picked up the senator's discarded gun, and ejected the magazine. "The ballistics on this weapon will match the bullet that killed Dr. Arrington last week," Gabriel stated flatly. "You killed the doctor to tie up loose ends, but you didn't know he kept a copy of the files here. You walked into your own grave, Senator." Cornelius's knees gave out. He collapsed to the floor, not in prayer, but in the total, crushing weight of realization. The handcuffs clicked onto his wrists with a sound that signaled the end of an era. "Take them," Adela said, turning away. "Take them all." Agents swarmed the room. Madeline, who had been dragged down from the driveway, was screaming about her civil rights. Vian was hyperventilating. Robert was simply weeping, looking at Adela with the eyes of a lost dog. "Adela," Robert pleaded, as an agent hauled him to his feet. "Please. I didn't know about the murder. I just wanted to make them proud. I loved you. In my own way, I loved you." Adela stopped at the foot of the stairs. She looked back at the man she had called her husband for 3 years, the man who had watched her scrub floors and said nothing. "Your love was a cage, Robert," she said, her voice devoid of hate, filled only with pity. "And I have finally chewed through the bars." She walked up the stairs, leaving the dungeon behind. Adela emerged from the front doors of the estate into the cool night air. The storm had broken. The clouds were parting, revealing a stark, bright, full moon that illuminated the wreckage of the Sterling Empire. Police lights painted the wet driveway in strobes of red and blue. Winston Graves was waiting by the lead SUV, holding a dry coat. He draped it over Adela's shoulders. "It is done, Madam Chairwoman," Winston said softly. "The assets are secured. The press release has been issued. By morning, the Blackwood name will be restored, and the Sterling name will be mud." "And the house?" Adela asked, looking back at the mansion one last time. "Seized," Winston confirmed, "pending your instructions." "Burn it down," Adela wanted to say, but she didn't. That was what a Sterling would do. "Turn it into a library," she said instead, "a public one. Let people learn here, instead of plotting." She climbed into the back of the SUV. Gabriel slid into the driver's seat. "You saved my life tonight, Gabriel," she said, leaning her head back against the leather headrest. Adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted, but lighter than she had felt in a decade. "I did my job, Adela," Gabriel said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "But you saved yourself. You stood in that room, unarmed, against a man who runs the country, and you didn't blink. Most people would have taken the check. Most people would have run. I guess I'm not most people," Adela smiled weakly. "I'm a Blackwood." The engine purred to life. "Where to?" Gabriel asked. "The airfield? Paris? Tokyo? The world is technically yours now." Adela looked at her hands. They were stained with the dust of the cellar, but they were free of the ring. She thought about the champagne, the caviar, the lies. "Take me to the diner," Adela said. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "The diner? Where you worked?" "The very same," Adela nodded. I haven't eaten since yesterday. I want a double cheeseburger with bacon." And then she paused, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes. "And then I want to buy the place. I think I'll fire the manager who let Robert harass me and turn the building into a foundation for women who need a fresh start." Gabriel grinned. It was a genuine, warm expression that transformed his scarred face. "A double cheeseburger it is, Madame Chairwoman." As the convoy pulled away, leaving the flashing lights and the ruins of the Sterling dynasty in the rearview mirror, Adela didn't look back. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in her life, she was the one holding the wheel. And just like that, the house of cards didn't just fall. It was incinerated. Adela Blackwood proved that true power isn't about how loud you shout at parties, but how quietly you can destroy your enemies when the lights go out. The Sterlings thought they were playing with a pawn, never realizing she was the queen waiting to clear the board. It's a brutal lesson. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever underestimate the person you force to their knees. They might just be tying their shoelaces before they kick you down. If you felt the satisfaction of that ending, do me a favor and smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more justice seekers like us. Were you surprised by the Doctor plot twist? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, stay sharp and watch out for the quiet ones.